Right. And also, we were talking about putting something up and I completely forgot and left my talk up. But there is a cut flower conference in outside of Syracuse, closer to Cazenovia, in Jamesville, New York, on the 28th and 29th of July, with speakers and tours of farms. So if anyone's interested, you can contact me. My email is eml38@cornell.edu. Or you can contact Lindsay or Caroline, whoever you would like to talk to. If you look on the Cornell Integrated Pest Management website under events, you can find it. But it should be a great program. So Lindsay is one of the speakers. Caroline, I think, is going to be there. I'm going to be there. All sorts of things going on. All right, so let's talk about beneficial insects and high tunnel cut flower production. So yeah, and there's my email address in case, how clever of me to put it up there right at the beginning, if you want to send me a question about anything or about the conference. And now we'll see if we can make this move. I got it set up. Okay, I'm going to start with a little glossary because there's lots of words that get used sort of related to biological control and beneficial insects. So biological control can sometimes be used to mean anything that is used to control a pest that is biological in nature. So sometimes it includes things like resistant varieties. A great method of biological control. I'm very fond of resistant varieties, but that's not what we're talking about today. Sometimes you just hear it called biocontrol, and depending on who you're talking to, that can include the use of fungi as well as insects to control pest insects. We're not talking about any fungi that do that today, but there are some. They're often applied as you would a pesticide. They often have labels through the EPA. And then there are also a few fungi eating insects. I've never worked with them, but they would be kind of interesting to see how they work. I think there's a little beetle that eats powdery mildew. And then some people include biopesticides, which are pesticides made from plant materials. So again, sometimes the word biocontrol is a bigger umbrella sort of word. Sometimes we talk about natural enemies. Again, those usually refer to insects or mites or nematodes that are used to control other organisms. And we're just going to call them beneficial insects. They're not all insects. There are mites and spiders and nematodes that we use a lot in biological control or in biological control of insect pests in greenhouses, high tunnels, and even outside. So what is biological control? Okay, using one organism to control another. And in this case, you notice we always use the word control or management, or sorry, we tend to use the word management when we talk about integrated pest management, which is what I do, or pest management, partly because control sounds like you're getting it down to zero. And with biological control in particular, we almost never get the pest population to zero. We want to get it to a point where there's no economic, or especially for cut flowers, no aesthetic damage that would make it a problem. So Ahmed, I see you've raised your hand. If you have something that you that like you can't see or can't hear, let us know. But maybe put it in chat to start with, if that's possible. Thanks. So why does biological control not usually eradicate the pest? Partly because it's a search and destroy mission. So you've got one organism, in this case, it's a little Persimolis mite, that's a predatory mite, that it has to go find the pest and eat it. And usually, I mean, if you get down to where you've got the last cookie. Oh, okay. Is anyone else having the problem with the audio?
The audio sounds fine on my computer.
Mine too.
Okay. So, Mel, you might try turning off your audio and turning it back on and see if that has an effect. I don't think you have your video on, so that usually sometimes the video on pulls too much juice somehow. I don't know. It's magic, but but I don't think you have that on. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so it doesn't usually eradicate the pest because it's kind of like the last cookie on the plate. Nobody wants to eat the last cookie on the plate. But also, if you've hidden the last cookie on the plate somewhere in the living room, maybe nobody will ever find it, and therefore it won't get eaten. So if there's not enough food to support a whole population or even a whole individual, they're going to go look for something else and find another place to find things to eat. So it's not 100% eradication, but if you can get to a point where there's no economic aesthetic damage, then you're not seeing a negative effect of the pests. And then there are two main kinds of beneficial insects that we use. There's all sorts of little bits within them, but we'll divide it into two. There's predators and there's parasitoids. We often call them parasitoids, not parasites, partly because of how they interact with the pest, but we'll talk about them both. Okay, so predators actually physically consume the pest insect. Does anybody know what this is? While you're thinking, so if you look at the picture that looks like a little worm, it's a little maggot. It's actually not chewing up that aphid, but it is sucking the guts out of it, which was the official terminology John Sanderson used to use. So sometimes it's nice if they're actually just pulling the insides out and leaving the husks behind, because you can tell they're working then, because you can actually see what's left. And especially something like just leaving the skin behind, it doesn't tend to stick to the leaf, it'll come off. So it's not such a problem. These are hoverflies. And you can tell they're flies, got big eyes and only one set of wings. So they're also mostly bee or wasp mimics. So you will see hoverflies very easily on a cut flower farm, outside and often inside too, hovering over your flowers. And so they're looking for nectar, and they will also sit on you and lick your sweat off if you are sweating. But they lay their eggs in the aphid colonies, and they're really good. Then when the larvae hatch out, they're really good at finding and eating the aphids, and they eat a lot of them. So you can get really good control of aphid pests with hoverflies. So they're predators. Parasites or parasitoids actually use the pest insect as a food source, and in most cases they don't kill it immediately. So you might have seen tobacco hornworms out in your vegetable patch with all these little white things stuck all over them. Those are actually pupae of this fly, the Scotesia fly. So it's laid its eggs in the hornworm. They've grown up and they're eating the inside out of the hornworm, but not killing it. And then they pupate to the outside. And then when they come out of their pupae, they leave those pupae and they fly around and find more hornworms to lay eggs in. So it is killing the insect, but usually more slowly. It's not also that necessarily that hornworm stops eating right away, but it doesn't feel very well pretty quickly and it will stop eating. So it's still there, but it's not doing the amount of damage that it would have before. And it also doesn't progress to the next stage, so you don't get more eggs from the hornworm. Butterfly. So a question for you: how many have ever used or are using beneficial insects? Yes, thank you for pointing out they'll invade my personal space. They sure will, but they're good guys. Has anybody ever used biological control or beneficial insects? Someone's used lady beetles. I'll talk about those in a minute. Just ordered lacewings, and lacewings, yep. Great. So if you have things you want to add, if you've tried something, and praying mantids, ladybugs, those are the most common ones that people buy because they're the ones that are most advertised for sale. There are some better places to buy beneficial insects, and I've got a little bit of a note that'll give you some indication. And there's some issues with some of the ones that you can buy sort of that are available to more homeowners. Okay, so let's talk about how to integrate beneficial insects into a pest management program. It's always integrated pest management with me, and it's never that you just do beneficial insects. You have to do everything else so that you're trying to avoid the problem as well as planning with the beneficial insects so that you have them when you need them. You're starting it when the population of insect pests is low enough, because they don't ever quite catch up. So although I say they don't quite catch up, but actually you can see them. If you've ever seen a good aphid infestation outside, I had one a couple years ago on cup plant covered with red aphids. Within less than a week, you could see mummies, you could see hoverfly larvae, you could see lacewing larvae. ladybugs and larvae. And then within a little less than a week after that, there was nothing left but the mummies. So everything was dead. So all those beneficials did actually control the population. In some cases, if a population is increasing and if it's something that continues to produce more young over a longer period of time, it's hard for the beneficial to catch up. So you are going to do all the things you would normally do. You're going to keep scouting. And so how to put them in might depend on where you're growing. And we're going to talk a little bit about both outside and inside. And then there are two main ways we talk about integrating them into a management program. It's either encouraging what's already there, or it's buying more and releasing them. And so the one where you're encouraging the existing populations is much more common in field production. And the one we call augmentative, where you buy and release them, is much more common in greenhouse production, partly because you've got control over the space a little bit more. But we are seeing more and more use of beneficials, purchased commercially produced beneficials outside as well. And so they're starting to do a little more research on it, which is good. So high tunnels are interesting as they kind of equal both outside and inside. This is a picture of one in New York State, and you can see it's got the sides only open a little bit and the back end is open. So it's possible that things will come in from the outside. So if your sides are open for ventilation, they're also open both for pests and beneficials to come in. Some people screen those, even though you roll the sides up, there's screening. And so that may prevent the pests and the beneficials from coming in, but then maybe it means that anything that you've bought and applied will stay in. And you can actually use different systems at different times of the year. So you may, when early in the spring, when things are more closed up, you may put in some that you purchased, and then as you open the house up and there are other things coming in from outside, you may stop buying them. It's never a one size fits all, do this, do this, do this, do this, here's the recipe. It's always based on what you're growing, when it's in there, and what you have as pests and what you have outside. It'd be nice if it was a recipe, but it's just not. So this is, again, that's kind of a pixelated picture, but it was something from Cornell to show, this thing is almost entire. It's basically just a rainout shelter. It's very, very open. And then there's some which are much more closed. Well, this has the sides open too. So, there's almost always some potential for movement of insects from outside to inside, and potentially the other way. So if you're going to do conservation biocontrol, where you're trying to take what's already there and encourage it. So in this case, you're kind of encouraging the beneficials that are outside of the tunnel. Part of this is based on if there's something to eat, something else will figure out how to eat it. And you don't actually know how much is there until it isn't there anymore. And that's what happens if you actually use a pesticide that kills your beneficials. Suddenly you start seeing spikes of insects that you didn't realize were being controlled by something else that you didn't necessarily notice either. It's true, we see in Christmas trees, if you spray something for aphids, often it will kill off the mite predators, and then suddenly you'll see a spike of spider mites on the trees as well. So what do you need to provide to keep them in the area, the good guys in the area? Sometimes it helps to know what you have, but you might not always know. So while you're scouting, ID the pests, ID the natural enemies too, but it can be tough. So this is all an indication of, beneficial insects or natural enemies. These are eggs that are laid on this caterpillar. You have to be looking pretty closely to see those. This is a little mite that's great, but it's in the soil and you're probably not going to see it. It's good at eating almost anything it can find in the soil. And this is a sad little caterpillar that has a virus, which is actually what you get in dipel. There's a compound within that virus that actually kills the insect. So if you see these sort of sad, shriveled up dead ones around, it may indicate that you've got the naturally occurring biological control of a disease on that insect pest. But all of those are kind of hard to see. And that's always the thing with scouting, is it's this balance between speed and accuracy or speed, and really getting to see looking at everything kind of at least somewhat. So, you're not going to be digging around in the soil looking for hypoaspis mites, because even if you did, I'm not sure you would necessarily find them. So here's another one. So I know that a lot of people know this one because they were saying that they use it. So if you see these things, you may think, well, especially when you see these little dragons, then also ladybug larvae look like dragons. This is a this is a lacewing larva. This is a lacewing adult. Those you might see, and these are lacewing eggs. They're actually laid up on stalks. Sometimes you'll see eggs that are laid in little flat panels, like ladybugs. Lacewing larvae are carnivorous and they will eat each other. And so they think they put them up on stalks partly for protection from other organisms, but also for protection from each other. And the adult doesn't actually feed on any insects. So it's the larva that's the predator. The lacewing adult is the delivery system. And so she will find a place where there's something for her larvae to feed on and lay her eggs there. And this one, I mean, sometimes this comes back to knowing what you've got. This stink bug looks a lot like a brown marmorated stink bug, but it is actually not. It is a predatory stink bug, so you can see it here feeding on this potato beetle larva. And you can kind of tell, see the mouth parts on this, they're really big and tough because they have to stick them into another organism. This is a plant feeding one, and if you look at the stylet, it's much thinner. That's where they normally keep it tucked under. This one's eating, so it's sticking out. So this is, I think, a green stink bug. We discovered when we were in Madison County last week a whole lot of twice spotted stink bugs, which I'd never seen, smaller than these two. And they were all over the snapdragons in one location, but I couldn't tell that they were doing any damage. So I'm kind of interested to find that out. So you have to know whether you've got a predatory one or a plant parasitic one or plant feeding one. There's actually one, it's not a stink bug, but it is a true bug that is sold as a biological control. But if there's no insects to eat, it will actually damage fruit on tomatoes. And so it's kind of a trade-off. So it's not one that I've seen used here much. I think it's available in the US, but I haven't seen it used much yet. So one of the things is always to get help. And I realized I didn't have the links for this. This thing is actually, you can get it online and you can put it all together into a little booklet. I like it because it's got things that you might confuse with the ones that are beneficials, and things, also information on how big they are so you can kind of identify them. This on beneficial insects on New York City farms, you can actually get on the Cornell Integrated Pest Management website. I will send the links for all these things to Lindsay to send out to the list, so that you can have them to use. While this is for New York City farms, there are also the similar ones everywhere. But it's also in Spanish if you need that. So what do you need to keep them around? We've talked about knowing what you've got, and we've talked about how to identify them. But in order to keep them there, you need to provide food and habitat. This is not my house, nor was that my lunch, so I don't know. So in some cases, you're providing food. You think, well, the pests are the food, but in some cases, you're providing food for a different stage. So for example, if you've got an adult that feeds on nectar or pollen, you might need to have nectar and pollen sources. Lucky for you, you are on a cut flower farm where we have a lot of nectar and pollen, and that's an advantage. You also need habitat both for protection, so they may just hide in there. Sometimes they're not out all day, and so they're going to find a place to hide when they're not active. That's true of the pests as well. And then they might need a place to reproduce or pupate or survive the winter. So it's one of the reasons we sometimes say, and it depends on what the issues are, don't clean up your field right away because there might be beneficials that are living in the stems or whatever. Again, a trade-off, and sometimes you just have to because of the timing, or there's a pest that will also live in there over winter. So those two things, food and habitat, is what you're providing. Some people will put in habitat specifically for beneficials. This is a trial that we have where we try putting in certain plants that are good for beneficials. We want to have season-long bloom. You can tell this is in fall because there's asters and goldenrod in there. If you're interested, you can look it up in Biocontrol Bites, and I can also send that to to Lindsay to send out. But I also, when we were doing this, because this is a project we have in Geneva, when we were installing it, I love, oops, sorry, I'll get to that other thing that I'm going to show you, I think, in a second. In many cases on a cut flower farm, you have plants outside as well as inside. So you don't really need to build habitat because you've already got it. So this ageratum in the front, it's got small flowers. A lot of beneficials like things with small flowers. We actually see vegetable growers sometimes putting pots of alyssum in a field to encourage beneficials. You've got all these things already here: nectar, pollen, places to hide. So you don't necessarily need to put in any kind of beneficial habitat. You already have it. This is what a friend of mine, well, whose project this is, created this meme. It's like what we thought establishing habitat for beneficial insects would be like. Great, a field of flowers. It's fabulous. It's actually a fair amount of work. You can see we're weeding. So one of the things with that is you want is season-long bloom. Again, with a cut flower farm, you often have season-long bloom. That's what you want to make money from. So it's not such a problem. This is a diagram from California. We don't have much going on in November and December or January, but there they do. But even we see a lot of ground beetles in grass walkways, and there are beneficials that like some of the weed species. Queen Anne's lace is a good one for a lot of beneficial species. So almost anything works. You don't have to have a certain kind of plant. Another thing is that, and I sort of mentioned this already, is using pesticides only when necessary and using them appropriately. And appropriately, I mean both using them just where you need them and not everywhere. And then also looking at things. So again, you're only treating the effective plants and leaving some non-crop areas or other plants that you're not spraying as refuges for the beneficials. Also looking at compatibility, which I'll show you about in a second, and then toxicity. And then the other thing is, so toxicity we're interested in, is it going to kill off the good guys? But then also, how long does it stick around? So if you've got something that you put out and it's toxic and it lasts a long time, there are residues left behind, that will often completely short circuit your beneficials. This is true if you're spraying things inside the high tunnel when you've bought in beneficials, but also outside. So in general, we're looking for things, we'd like things that either have sort of a broad range of activity, moderate or low impact, and don't last very long. So these are some of the softer things that we use, softer, that are usually moderate or low impact and low duration. And often they have some, they're broadly effective. But again, broadly effective means that they might affect everything, where if you've got something like Bacillus thuringiensis, it's got target species and is less likely to affect the beneficials if they aren't in that those target species or target genera. So this is the two places that I said about ordering beneficials from, are BioBest and Koppert. There are some other companies. Often you go through, sometimes you go through a broker in New York State. There is a broker, there's several actually. There's one on Long Island, Green Island Distributors, I think is the name. And then there's one in Central New York. IPM Labs is a broker where they will order whatever you need and consolidate it. There are other ones. Oh shoot. There's one that vegetable growers use a lot, and I'm forgetting the name. I will also see if I can put together a list. I think I have a list of companies that sell beneficials. And since I'm talking about companies and so forth, we really want to go with the ones that are reputable and give you good product. You can buy things from places that are not. Arbicore Organics is the one that I was trying to think of that does a lot with vegetable crops as well. They're also a good one. Ladybugs, one of the problems, or a couple of problems with ladybugs is they tend to be wild collected, and then they bring with them whatever they have from what they had in the wild. And sometimes they bring diseases with them, and they tend to be wild collected in the West and brought here. Sometimes they don't work very well because you put them out and off they go. They're not going to stick around. There is one kind of lady beetle that is produced in a lab. I suspect it's more expensive than buying the other kind, but at least it's lab reared. And so that means there's some kind of quality control. and in terms of not being wild collected also. Mantids are the same, have some of the same issues. The praying mantids that we get are often a species from Asia. They're not the native ones. And so they are actually interfering with our native mantids. I've talked to people who thought they worked really well. Same thing with lady beetles. And one of the things about lady beetles is they'll tolerate the colder weather, so they work well in the spring. And they're generalists as our mantids. But from what we found, mantids really aren't as good as we think they are. But part of it is because we're bringing in non-native mantids. Someone said they purchased from Arbico and they like them, so that's a good advertisement there. And then, so if you want a general one that's more easily available, lacewings are a good one to go with. And I saw several people were using lacewings, so that's good. So this is an example of a compatibility table where you can say, okay, these are the beneficials that I'm using. It tends to be the ones that are purchased, but we have aureus, wild, and some of the other ones you can also find out in nature. And then what am I going to apply? And it will tell you both how toxic they are. So this one, S-fate's very toxic, plus it persists more than 8 weeks, which is just way too long to use it effectively if you want to use biological control. And sometimes it has to do with how it's applied. So a spinosad that's sprayed on is much more toxic than the one that's drenched on. And so you can go, these are both now apps, but BioBest and Coppered have apps you can buy that let you put in the names of the insects that you're interested in and the things you want to spray, and then they'll give you the information. You can also see that sometimes we just don't know. This is Beauveria bassiana, which is a naturally occurring fungal pathogen of insects, but you can also purchase it, and they just don't have any information on it. So it's nice to try and look at the information, but sometimes you just can't find it all. And sometimes, let's see, some of them also will tell you by what life stage. So here you can see, yeah. So in this case, this aureus, which is a beetle, they've got nymphs, adults, and then how persistent it is. So they'll look at different life stages sometimes too. Okay, let's talk about conservation biocontrol actually in greenhouses. And this is one, these are a couple of things that are interesting. We didn't expect to see them. And then there's another one as well. Sinacra poperi and Hexacola neoscatella, scatellae, are two little parasitoid wasps. Until they're wasps, they have wasp waists. They're teeny. They're not like as big as these pictures look. You would never notice them. And Sinacra is a parasitoid of fungus gnats, and Hexacola is a parasitoid of shore flies. So we have found them in greenhouses just naturally occurring, even more enclosed greenhouses, and it tends to be the ones where there's not too many pesticides being sprayed. Another one that comes in and we find it consistently, it's a European species, nobody knows how it got here, but it's in most greenhouses, is hunter flies. They look like small houseflies. If you've got sticky cards out, you will catch all of these good guys, which is too bad, but hopefully they do what they need to do before they get caught. The hunter flies look like small houseflies, and they're cool because they catch everything on the wing. So they catch white flies, they catch fungus gnats, but they catch them in the air. So they're kind of fun to watch. So let's talk about augmentative control. I'm going to wait for a second and see if there's any questions that pop up. Yeah, something the beneficials come later than you'd like them to come. Okay, I'm not waiting a long time, too long, but I don't see anything right there. So augmentative control now is when you're actually adding a biological organism to the environment. And most people are not going out and collecting their own. There are some people that will actually produce their own. There's some that you can produce. You can produce Athena rove beetles. You can produce nematodes, kind of stinky, but you can. But most people buy them. So they're the ones that are commercially available. And this is a list, a sort of a generalized list of the most common things that we use, divided up by the type of organism And so within this like mites we have, and they tend to get called by their scientific names. Oh, Q&A. See if I can see Q&A. I can't find the Q&A, so I'll go find that later. Maybe somebody else can find it. So they tend to go by their scientific names. These are all species names. Cucumerus swirsky, Persimolis, Hypoaspis. Hypoaspis is the one that's in the soil that feeds on a lot of things like fungus gnats and other things you can find there. Persimolis is a mite that controls spider mites. Cucumerus and Swirsky controls a bunch of things. Cucumerus is good for thrips. But we also use nematodes, we use bugs and beetles. I already kind of talked about why ladybugs aren't on this list. Delphastus is actually a lady beetle. It's a small little black one, but it's produced in the lab. Then there are some wasps. We've talked about some of them in laced wings. One decision to make when you're looking at this is whether or not you want something that's really adapted to a particular pest or as a generalist feeder. Again, generalist feeders are handy because they'll feed on whatever you've got, but sometimes you want something that's really directed towards a particular pest because that's the pest that you're having the most trouble managing. And so, the difference between spraying a product and drenching. Spraying is you're spraying it over the foliage. Drenching is you're actually adding it to the soil in the pot. So it might come in with the irrigation water, or you might just be pouring the solution on the pot. Oh, the toxicity of both. The toxicity as a pesticide is the same. It's just in a different location. And the reason it has different toxicity to the beneficials is that if you're spraying it on the foliage and that's where the beneficial is, you'll also contact the beneficial. Whereas if the beneficials are on the leaves and you're putting it in the pot, often, even though it may be moved through the plant from the roots up, the beneficial is not feeding on the plant, it's feeding on the pests. And so it's not going to be contacted or come in contact with the pesticide. So that's why you might see a difference in toxicity to the beneficials based on how the pesticide is applied to the plant. Hopefully that makes sense. So adapted one or generalist, it kind of depends on what your issues are. And I'm not going through absolutely everything because we would be here longer than we have time for, but I'm going to go through some of them. So example, here's Cucumerus. Both Cucumerus and Swirsky look pretty much similar. They're very small. That one is eating a first instar thrips. So if you have an idea of how small thrips are, the first instars are the smallest ones out there. So they only feed on the first instars. And I'll show you a video of a little bit why. Swirsky will also eat whitefly eggs. So it's a little bit more of a generalist than Cucumerus is. It's also more expensive. But it's interesting in that Cucumerus is better if the temperatures are cool. So if you're using it in the spring, you might want to use Cucumerus, where in the summer, which tolerates warmer weather, you might want to switch to Swirsky, and you don't have to use the same thing every time. Most beneficials are being applied every week or every 2 weeks. And if you think, oh gosh, that's expensive, it can be expensive. And sometimes the shipping costs are the big cost. Cucumerus was one we see for thrips management. It's very commonly used in conjunction with nematodes. So they'll distribute the mites all over the plants and put nematodes in the soil. And between the two of them, they get the first instar thrips and the thrips pupae, and you can get good thrips management that way. Let's see if I can make this work. They don't actually make that noise, but those are thrips that are older than first instar, whacking the mites out of the way. Like, go away, don't bother me. So they're just too big for the mites to feed on. So they have to get the first instars. In terms of applying them, there's lots of different ways. They come in different formats. Sometimes they'll come in these bottles mixed with brands, so you can actually sprinkle them over your plants. This is actually an air blower where they're blowing them over the plants. You can kind of see here, this is where there are plants that are plant to plant. And so in a commercial greenhouse where they're growing a lot of the same thing, this might make more sense. A lot of growers, both of bedding plants and other things, vegetables also, but this might make sense for cut flowers, is to actually use what's considered a slow release bag or a sachet that you hang in the foliage. Again, this one's Cucumerus, but you can find sachets for other things where there's a little hole in the back of the bag. They come out, they have food in there. There's some other mites in there that they feed on. They'll come out, and they come out over time. So it lasts maybe up to 4 weeks, not at the same level. It'll be a bigger shot and then they'll tail off. But hopefully they're doing some management so your pest numbers are decreasing also. If you've ever gotten a house or a cut flower, or sorry, a house plant or plants from that you're going to put out in your garden, sometimes you'll get them with the sachets in them still. I just got one the other day. And so this is easier to apply in a way. You're putting it out once and you get a longer effect. This would actually work for cut flower growers. We don't see it too much in this country because it has often they're applying it in that case with the pesticide boom, but it's sachets and ribbons. So you just start and you pull it down the row. If you had fairly long rows of a cut flower, that might actually work. There are gaps. Some of the little sachets in that row don't have the pest in them or don't have the beneficial in them, but it kind of spreads them out through your row. This is Ophidius. It's a parasitoid wasp that works on green peach aphid. So this one, you need to know something about what you've got because Ophidius is a great green peach aphid management tool, but it doesn't work on larger aphids like potato aphids. For that, you'd use Ophidius ervi. Actually, they've started selling mixed Ophidius species in the little packets so that or in the bottles so that you get them both. So if you don't know which kind of aphid you have, you'll get some of each. So this one is actually laying its egg in an aphid, and then you end up with these mummies that look like they're all puffed up with gas and they turn kind of brownish. Sometimes you'll see them with a little round hole in the back end, which means the egg is hatched and the larva is fed, and then it's turned into a wasp and it's emerged, it's cut its way out. Interestingly, sometimes you see them with a jagged edged hole, and that means there was a parasitoid of the parasitoid. So now we've got a whole nother layer of environment going on. If you've got a huge aphid population on parts of the plant that you're actually selling and you're using something that leaves mummies, one of the problems is the mummies don't come off very easily. You can't just wash off the leaves or knock them off. They don't come off. So that's a potential problem for using something like this. You might want something that's actually eating the aphids so that you're not seeing what's left on the plant. But these guys sure work. And what's interesting is sometimes they will find aphids that you don't know you have. It is one of the things when we're talking about application, when you know what kind of pests you tend to get and when they come in, you actually want to have your beneficials arriving slightly before that. It seems like you're throwing them away if there's nothing to eat. But again, you want them to come in and manage the population when it's small. And they're really good at searching. They will find aphids that you don't know you have. And again, this is a green lacewing. And so this is a generalist, so it'll feed on aphids, whitefly larvae, some scales, mealybug. You can buy them in different formats. You can buy them as eggs. You can buy them as larvae. They're in little separate containers. They're like in corrugated cardboard so that they don't eat each other. And I don't think you could buy the adults already hatched out, but you can buy the other formats. Just to show you. So that's lacewings. Sometimes they come in the larvae in this carrier, so you can see how those are buckwheat husks. So you can see how small they are. And they're good at searching. They'll go look for things. And so they're looking for something to eat and they kind of poke around. It seems like they're not very efficient. Like this is a whitefly scale and they're not very good at getting their mouth parts in it. But once they get their mouth parts in, they'll suck out all the contents. This is another one called Aureus, minute pirate bugs. You can find these outside. They will bite you, but not very hard. The only reason I know that is when I did my my master's, I sat out in a cornfield and watched them. I watched European corn borer eggs hatch, and I watched the minute pirate bugs come in and pick up the brand new corn borer larvae, and carry them around like they were very proud of them. Carry them around on their mouth parts, and every once in a while they would bite me. So again, this is it's somewhat of a generalist, but it tends to get used for thrips. It's often found in flowers with pollen because they will also feed on pollen. Again, in the cut flower our farm, you've got lots of pollen. This one, if you're using it really early in the season, they go into diapause. So you have to have a certain length of daylight for them to come out and emerge. But they can be very useful and they're quite good at what they do. Again, they can fly around and find the thrips or whatever. In a different kinds of greenhouses, we tend to use ornamental peppers as a banker plant. And part of the reason is because ornamental peppers are flowering and they will continue to flower, especially if you take the fruit off. And so the aureus like the pollen, so they'll survive in here and then they'll fly around and find things to eat. And you can see in this case, there's 4 or 5 banker plants in this whole greenhouse. And then Athena is this rove beetle. It feeds in the soil, so it will feed on almost anything it can find in the soil. There again, they can move around very fast and they're quite good at finding things. Sometimes you'll see these on the soil surface if you've applied them. And one of the things I like about Athena, it's Delosia Athena because they changed the name, and sometimes you still see it called Delosia, but we're getting to the point where it's called Athena more often. Or else I've gone the wrong way with that. I can't remember at the moment. That once you have them, and if you've got soil beds in your high tunnels, they will often survive there and come back the next year. So, and often too, you can put them down once, maybe twice in the spring, and then you've got them all season. You don't have to keep applying them. So they're a more economical option. So when can you actually use augmentative control, biocontrol in field production? But sometimes, again, it's something we still don't know too much about. And a big thing is you have to make sure that you know that the benefit exceeds the price. But I wanted to show you this example. This is a paper that someone wrote, partly because it's such a nice description of a program, biological control as a program. So this is something where they're using it outside to control spider mites and hops. Okay, that's lovely, but it works. It would work to some. It would also work in high tunnels. So they're looking at having mites as a problem both early season and mid season. They're using Persimolis, which is a little predatory mite, and both Persimolis and Californicus are predatory mites, and then this is Stethurus, a little beetle. And so early in the season, they add some of the mites and the Stethurus, and they're getting control of the early season. And then they also look at the mid-season ones, and so they put Stethurus predatory mites and maybe some predatory bugs out also, and then they get mid-season control. But not just that, they're doing things like making sure that they're not using other pesticides to kill off their beneficial insects. In this case, moderating nitrogen rates, and it's something for aphids and other insects that are sucking the sap out of the plants. If you are over fertilizing your plants, often you get big flushes of the pest insect. They really like the high nitrogen rate. And we don't know whether it's either more attractive to them or they're just having higher population success because they've got more nitrogen. But you always want to make sure that you're not over fertilizing whatever you're doing. And then they're looking again, even at fungicide applications when they are selective aphicides, because again, that's the problem with you kill off the beneficials with something that's actually controlling the aphids, looking at moderating the potential for drought stress. And then because this is spider mites, dust. So spider mites like it dry and dusty. So if you're outside and you've got dust on roads coming on your plants, they'll actually be very happy. But if you look at that whole kind of concept of a management plan, it gives you not just the beneficial insects, but all the other things to consider. It is a little mind-blowing when you're trying to get this all organized, to have to think of all these things. And I will tell you that I think, and it'd be interesting to see what the people who've used beneficials think. The first time you use it, it doesn't always work. You have to be a little bit pig-headed. And I've seen with greenhouse growers that are using it, sometimes, it's about 3 seasons where finally they've got it integrated into their management system, because rarely do you have just one pest. And so you might be using biocontrol for 1 or 2 of them, but you might have to use pesticides for some of the others because you don't have good control with beneficials. And to get all those things integrated, it just takes time. So there's my email again. Oh, yes, I should take this number off because it doesn't work anymore. Don't try calling me. You won't get anywhere. But there is my email address if you'd like to contact me. And I see that I have, it says, the CCE Cornell have a class that Elizabeth Lamb teaches regarding the bugs. And then Oh, thank you. Well, very nice. You could be successful in IPM with me. We've done some things periodically. We haven't done a whole class. There is an integrated pest management class, but I don't teach it at Cornell, but I don't teach it. CCE has done some programs on biological control that pop up at different meetings. Let's see, I can stop sharing this and then you can actually see my face in giant. And I have been thinking about doing something where we actually even have people that produce some of the beneficials, like a webinar series where they come and talk about a particular one or two at a time. But there is, I think, a need for this, and it's true that it's complicated, and so it takes a little trial and error and a lot of information. But thank you for the compliment. Does anyone have any other information that they would like to, or questions they'd like